Hi, I'm Matt Anderson, and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people get out of their own way, and you can too. I'm very excited that for episode 4 today, I'm interviewing Will Barron. Will is the host of the Salesman podcast and also the founder of salesschool.org. Correct me, Will, if I got your title wrong there. The podcast itself, as far as I know, latest numbers anyway, gets over 700,000 monthly downloads, has had 25 million plus in its history, over 1 million views on YouTube. And then near and dear to my heart, Will is a Yorkshireman. He's from Leeds. My dad grew up in Yorkshire. Will, he probably didn't know that trivia. But my first, so welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be on, Matt. I'm glad to have a chat with you, mate.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excited to talk to you. So my first question is, it kind of actually relates very much to the title of the podcast in a way, The Road Not Taken. But what prompted you to take a different path? I know you were in medical device sales. So what prompted you to get to that point where you were unhappy with where your life was going and you decided to take a different path?
So there were many prompts over the years, but it all collided with my partner I'm still with now, kind of 6-7 years later. I was sat in the pub one day and I'd had a super stressful day at work, and I had this context of the conversation of I was complaining about working in medical device sales, sitting in nice offices, hanging out with surgeons and nursing staff, and my girlfriend, who was and still is a doctor, she's now a geriatrician, she was telling people real bad news, kind of day in, day out, delivering news and helping people through that. And it really made me, for whatever reasons, really hit me in the heart all of a sudden. I was like, I'm moaning about something here that's not, I shouldn't be moaning about. And I've got myself wrapped up in this, and I've created this own little bubble around myself that, is kind of impregnable by other people. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of in this downward spiral, and I wasn't depressed or anything along those lines, but all of a sudden I just kind of burst out into tears. This is in this pub in Leeds. I won't name which one because I still go in there, and I don't want people tying too much of it together and giving me stick when they see me in there. But basically just burst out crying, and my partner again was just like, what the heck's going on? Tried to explain it to her. It made no sense whatsoever, but that was my real a low moment. Mm-hmm. in the grand scheme of things. Is not that people go through much worse and have to kind of suffer through more than what I ever have. But that was my kind of low moment, which made me then lead to kind of growing the podcast and starting the sales school and all the other stuff which came on the other side of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, my first question on that is, if you were really unhappy in a sales job, I'm part of me surprised that you then wanted to start a podcast about sales. So how do those dots connect?
Super simple. I had no reason to be unhappy, essentially. There was one individual in the organization who was being a bit of an idiot with me, and I could blank that out. I only had to see him every now and again. So we just didn't get on. We genuinely clashed. But then with my sales manager, and since learning about personality types and all the stuff that we're doing, the same with the mindset side of things, I now totally understand it, that we had totally different personality types. We were trying to communicate on two different channels, and we were just missing each other. And he's a good dude, and hopefully he thought I was a reasonable dude as well. But we started clashing then because we couldn't communicate with each other. And obviously sales is a stressful role as it is, never mind having someone on your back where you can't get them off your back, even though you think you're doing all the right things. So this all amalgamated with me literally sitting down in Headingley, where I used to live in Leeds, with my laptop. I remember it vividly. It was my work laptop. It's probably not the best thing to be kind of searching for careers and all this kind of stuff on, because they clearly could trace it all. But I sat there and I just Googled how to be better at sales, or how to do X, Y, Z, or how to build relationships. All these things that salespeople are searching for constantly, and there's a ton of websites that provide content on it. But all the content was some old dude or some woman in a power suit with a terrible, cheap green screen background going through the 5 ways to cold call, or 3 ways to close the deal. And none of this is relevant to me. It might be, or then it might have been relevant to people who were just selling on the phone day in, day out. Yeah. If I tried to use any of this kind of stuff on a surgeon, they'd kick me out of the operating room and I'd never be allowed back in there. So the long answer to your short question, Matt, was that there was no content. So I thought, well, if I've got an interest in this, and I've been doing it for years, I've had some success in it. I was never an A player, but I was always kind of a B, kind of high C player. Right. I was like, well, there's a premise here of me trying to improve myself, taking people on a journey with me, creating content, throwing it out there, and there was definitely a gap in the market. And fortunately, because it sounds more skillful than what it was just trial and error. But fortunately, the audience has come on the back of it as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I actually can very much relate to that, because I feel like I sort of invented the work that I certainly spent many years doing in a somewhat similar manner. I mean, it didn't happen immediately, but it was a connection of dots and recognizing that there was something significant missing in the market. So I can very much relate to what you're talking about. And yet, in terms of the podcast, when did that idea come along in terms of training? I mean, did you initially think, I should start a training company or anything like that?
So there was definitely no ambitions for a training company. And this is something that my audience has pushed onto me with the sales school, as opposed to something that I set out to in the beginning. The very premise of the show is I'm just a salesperson like the audience. I'm asking all these probably dumb sounding questions on occasion, and it makes the guests' ears prick up with some of the questions I ask, because I genuinely don't know the answer. I'm not trying to be acting smart or clever. So sales training was kind of not in the picture at first. So I created just a ton of content. I created books, I created videos, we created some kind of bits of audio, and then we did a couple of interviews. And the only thing that anyone ever downloaded, the only thing that anyone ever cared about was the podcast. And it makes total sense, right? Salespeople, when they're in the office or they're in front of customers, that's the time that they can leverage to make their money. When they're on the way to the office or on the way back from the office or customers, they can stick a podcast on, they can listen to audio, even if it's an audio, whatever it is, they can use that time and better leverage it versus listening to some nonsense pop music on the radio.
Right. Now, you were kind enough. I know I sent you some other questions that I said I probably wouldn't necessarily ask, but I'm glad you answered them. But you alluded to, I think it's fair to say, a bumpy first couple of years. Can you talk about that a little bit more, about kind of sticking around long enough to see success?
So this is I've literally just done a training in the sales school on sticking about for success, and the premise that we're trying to teach there, and I'll answer your question but I thought this was really interesting. Of humans are really on the mindset piece. Humans are really dumb at remembering past events. So what we did 6 months ago is what's given us success now, and this is especially true for salespeople. You'll get a call out of the blue, and you go, "Oh, this has been a great month because this person called me back." But it's because of the work you did 2 years ago that caused it to happen. So the sales school, the salesman podcast, everything that we've done had a super slow start, because you need that compounding effect over time, right? So when I left my medical device sales role, I had a chunk of cash in the bank that I'd saved up, and I moved in with one of my good mates. And so essentially the rent was non-existent. I didn't go out drink. I didn't go out and party. It was over in, for anyone who knows Yorkshire, it was over in Bradford. So I was away from Leeds. I was away from a lot of the friends I'd built up here, where, that was a good and a bad thing as well, to be able to get my head down. And I didn't do anything for 2 years. I was in this horrible little box room. The room that I started the podcast in literally no longer exists, because my mate's changed the stairs around in his house, and the room was that small. He just turned it into a bigger landing at the top of the stairs now. That's how tiny the office was at the beginning. If you're on our YouTube channel, you can see just tiny, terrible, dark, dingy room, and I'm terrible on camera, and it's a state. But for whatever reason, it got a little bit of a following. And then bigger companies came along that wanted to be kind of wrapped up in the branding of it as well, not just X many downloads and the exposure, but they wanted to support what we were doing and the messaging behind it, in that I'm just trying to help salespeople. What we say is thrive in sales. So not just hit your sales target with some weird slimy techniques and tactics, but how to really thrive in sales, have a good time doing it, so then you can reap the rewards of it. So that first couple of years I was in with my mate in Bradford, didn't do anything. He would go out regularly, and I'd be sat at home kind of just mulling away, writing content, creating podcasts. Moved to a slightly less terrible flat here in Leeds, and then now we're in the studio where we are now. And it was funny, 2 years ago, we've been in this place for 2 years now, and it was, if you look again on the YouTube channel, that's the best way to kind of judge all this visually as things go on and change. And I get increasingly more wrinkled and old with the stress that I'm under with running the business. And I'm kind of like young and fresh faced kind of 3-4 years ago when we first got started. You can see the progression of, there was a brick wall background, which was just stuck on the wall. It wasn't real bricks. Then there was the screen for my living room. So every time I recorded a podcast, I'd literally wheel in the screen and I'd wheel it back out to watch Coronation Street or EastEnders or whatever I'd watch in the evening. Then obviously the studio, we've got proper lighting, cameras, we've got people coming in helping with the production and all this kind of stuff. So again, long answer to your short question, Matt, but that was the journey halfway. And I'd love to say it was super difficult and times are challenging, but again, it's just what I said at the beginning of the answer. It's the compound effect of people forget all the stuff that they do 2-3 years ago, which add up to now. And it's not that every day I'm doing something incredible and useful. It's just all these little kind of stones that, better way would be to a big block of stone you'd be chipping away to get the statue underneath it.
Are you saying then, though, that in those first couple of years, especially during the times when it just didn't feel like anything was really happening, I'm most curious to know what you did to keep your morale up?
Oh, no morale. That was rubbish. I just kept plodding along. I had to pay the bills. That was as simple as what it was. Some of it was a bit of a chip on my shoulder that I've said I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to look silly otherwise. That may or may not be healthy. It may or may not help people. So just damn stubbornness. And then, the other side of it was with the ad buys on the podcast. If I got double the number of downloads by promoting it, by getting a bigger, better guests on, by better production values, I would earn double the revenue, which then would allow me to my friend's house. Clearly, I didn't want to live with a 40-year-old bloke for the next 25 years of my life. I have aspirations to own my own property and, eventually own my own property empire and all this kind of stuff. So it was and social pressure as well. Of again, don't want to be kind of living with my mate for that longer period of time. It's fine when you're starting a business, you're hustling, you're getting things set up. But there's all kind of extra bits of pressure on top that it makes it inevitable that you have to get yourself and dig yourself out of those situations. And again, not that I'm trying to make this sound more complex or difficult than what it is. I think it is just grinding it out every day. And as long as you're on the right path, as long as you treat it like a scientific experiment of my hypothesis is if I get this many downloads, this brand will want to work with me. That allows me to do X, Y, Z. And you move towards it and it either works or it doesn't. And you keep reassessing at that point. I don't think it's much more complicated than that. I'd like to make it more complicated than that, but I don't think it is.
So you learned what it took to make money doing a podcast. Is that right?
How do you mean?
Well, because my understanding, and again, you've been podcasting a lot, 4 years now. So, but I don't really. My sense around podcasting is that most podcasts don't make any money whatsoever. I had no idea what the percentage is, if it's 95% or higher than that. But I'm just, it's more that leap of faith that I wonder you took. That it sounds like you knew that you could make a living on it if you continue to do the right thing over and over again. I mean, is that 100% accurate? I mean, there must have been days when you questioned what you were doing as well. And again, where I'm going with some of this is because, too many people, I think, they give up on taking a big jump in life because at some point they somehow believe I don't deserve to be there, I don't belong there, I'm an imposter, and there's other things that go into it as well. But you clearly keep surpassing that, and I'm curious what you either told yourself or what you read or watched to kind of keep persevering and growing.
So 2 things. One, I still feel like an imposter in that the sales school is going to be doing and is doing pretty decent revenue, more revenue than what a kind of a small sales training company would be. And there is a legitimate kind of good on paper growth curve there from the advertising and the things that we're doing. So I feel like a total imposter because the whole premise of the podcast is that I'm not a trainer, right? So I don't think the imposter syndrome ever goes away. If it does go away, you're probably not moving fast enough. That's how I would potentially look at it. Having said that, it was I can't remember the actual quote itself, but it was in a Richard Branson book. He is less concerned about the upside and more concerned about the downside. And he wants to mitigate as much of the downside away. And he would go with a deal, a project, a business where there's little downside and little upside versus he's looking for asymmetrical kind of risk reward. So I knew with the podcast, with the business, everything I was doing, I could just go and get another sales job. I'd be more employable having interviewed 100 people on sales and built a bit of content, going back into another medical device sales role than I would have been beforehand. So I would have ended up with a better base salary, and I was learning valuable skills. So I think this is important as well. For me, again, I don't know who said this to me, but someone definitely did right at the beginning of it all. They said you want to learn essentially a high value skill, whether that be media and podcasting and being at the forefront and being the face of a product or service. Clearly, that's crazy valuable. You want to learn to consult. You want to learn to speak on stage. Mm-hmm. And you can do all of these in a sales role. You can do all of these if you're running a small agency, whatever it is. But those little things where, if I'm desperate now, I get asked to speak all the time. If I needed 20 grand, 10 grand because we just hired some people and I got the cash flow wrong and all this kind of stuff, then I'd just go and speak. I could go and consult. I get asked for consulting regularly, and I only do very little amounts of it. So I knew that I had essentially a cash flow skill in both selling and then kind of the media side of things that I could fall back on if it went completely to nonsense. Again, mitigating that kind of downside versus the upside. And I'd saved up a chunk of cash, so I had. I can't remember how much money I had in the bank at the time, but it was probably 12 months' money.
Yeah. As
I set off in this journey, so it wasn't like, and I was with my partner. We'd only been together for like about a year at that point, so it was somewhat serious. But I'm still with her now. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have any kids. I didn't have a mortgage, and so again, I just mitigated all the downsides so I could take that risk. And it was just an adventure, if nothing else. If it all went completely to nonsense and completely to rubbish, I'd just get another sales job, and I'd still be more ahead or further ahead than what I was before.
And it's also fair to say, though, you were very sensible financially, though. I mean, you said you didn't go out at all and do anything.
I did nothing. It was boring.
Yeah. But you kept, I'm just impressed. So you had a bit of a plan B, but you also had the confidence to know you were building great skills. You were learning from great minds that ultimately, is it fair to say you kept telling yourself only good things can come from this?
I think that is my mindset in general. So my dad is a pessimist. I'm an optimist, and we never clash on things, but I can see that stark contrast whenever, literally every time I speak to him. Liverpool Football Club played last night, and he was giving me all this kind of thing of, well, in the Champions League, so many teams have got through, and then this happened, so that means statistically we're very unlikely to get through. And then they went out and thrashed the team that they were playing and did really well. My thoughts are, it doesn't really matter. It's football. It's only a sport that we're watching, but there's no reason, like statistics of other teams that have gone before them have nothing to do with the variable of Liverpool Football Club at that moment in time. They're in control of their destiny. Other variables that have gone on around them don't affect them. So my kind of mindset in all of this is I'm in control of my own destiny. I'm in control of most of the variables. There's very few variables that other people have control of me. Like now with the business, I've got at least 12 months cash in the bank, and my goal is to always have that kind of cash in the bank to cover expenses. So as we record this, we're due some kind of massive economic collapse. So I'm trying to hedge against that in that being kind of cash rich at the moment and leveling up our levels of cash flow. I can both survive it and hopefully kind of thrive in that space as well. And if it's property or I've even looked at buying some sales training consultancies up here in Yorkshire that I know aren't doing very well now because I'm helping them out with different things. They're probably not going to do very well in that period of time. And so that's a way to scale for us as well. That is kind of a new thing on my plate. But it's always being positive about it because I feel like I'm in control. I can do essentially, sounds cheesy, but I feel like I can do genuinely anything I want within reason. And, I feel like people who think like that tend to get away with it as well.
Yeah. Do you recall where you learnt the idea that you're in control of your destiny?
So I didn't always feel like this, but I don't know that there was a specific moment. When I was younger, I was massively introverted. As a kid growing up, I played drums in a band, and that got me to kind of be comfortable being at the back of the stage, but in front of an audience. So I knew from college onwards, even at university, I was still shy. I was seen as relatively outgoing, and I could go and shake hands, and we were on student radio and all this kind of stuff. So we had the prime time show on at Bangor FM with about 4 people listening on a Friday afternoon. So we did all that. Too. Yeah. But one thing that did change a lot of things for me in my mindset on taking risks was, I think her name's Susan Jeffers. The book is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Yeah.
And just this the constant loop of, and I find myself doing it now, of what's the downside? Can you survive the downside? Then get on with it. And again, it's one for me to say this. if someone's listening and they want to start a business or start a podcast, and you've got kids and you've got a mortgage and you've got all this, well, there's two things. One, you've chosen to do all of that, or even if you haven't and life's give you a kick in the nuts, the sooner you take responsibility for everything that has happened to you and you accept that, perhaps if I take responsibility for it now, I own it and I'm in control of it, even if people are in a terrible situation, that allows people to, and I have this mindset, it's a Jacko Willink kind of quote of extreme ownership. I believe that for me to have control, I've got to take responsibility for everything. I've got a problem with one of our freelancers at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's my fault. I've not helped them out. I've not helped them do their job. So rather than bitch and moan about it, when I take that stance, I can go, okay, we can now solve the problem. But with Susan Jeffers' book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, it's very similar to what I was saying with Richard Branson earlier on, of when you know the downside, when you understand the risks of it, and when you calculate that the risks are worth it, then there's no reason not to do it, right? You're going against logic. You're being illogical if you don't make that leap of faith at that point.
Yeah, one of the things you said in the response in an earlier email to me was, that's why I was asking about that, in control of the destiny, was this: if I blame myself for everything, I'm in control of my destiny. And I just thought, wow, that's a really compelling mindset to have, because you're right, then you stop blaming other people for things and just take charge more. And I was curious how long you believed that.
I don't know. Yeah. Certainly as a kid, certainly as a young adult. So I'm 32. I think I'm 32. I'm 32 now. As a young adult at uni, I would definitely blame people. I would definitely say, well, this person has this because of X, Y, Z. I would say, this person's privileged. This person has been given this. And so at that point, that tells me that I didn't have the mindset that I can have that as well. I've just got to put the hustle in, and I've got to put the hours in. I've got to come up with a plan to get it. So I think it's a gradual thing. And I'm pretty sure, if you interview me in another 4 or 5 years, Matt, I'll probably be thinking the same, but even stronger.
Yeah.
And there'll be more nuance to it. And I don't think it's something that there was no kind of like click moment of, I don't think there was anyway, of, this person died. I went through this tragedy. There was this good thing. This person gave me this advice. Mm-hmm. I think it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Of you take responsibility, you do the right thing, you make the leap, and kind of a few years later, because that's how long it takes to get anything kind of worthwhile, you get the positive feedback, and then you go, okay, this worked once. And again, I don't think this is consciously happening in my brain. I think this is kind of going through my subconscious. But once you do it once, you can do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And one of my biggest fears is that I'm not doing that feedback loop fast enough, that my goals now are not as big as what they could or should be. So that's probably kind of a twist on the topic there. But that's one of my fears, that I'm going to look back in 20 years and be, well, I shouldn't be aiming for a couple of million in revenue in kind of year 1 and 2 of the sales school. I should be aiming for 10, 15, because that could have been achieved as well.
It must help interviewing people who are very knowledgeable about different fields of sales and the mindset. I mean, does that help, or how does that help reinforce where you're going for you?
It's great. So again, there's this cliche quote of, you are the kind of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, that they make up your kind of mix. So I don't have that many friends. I train jiu-jitsu with a bunch of great dudes and girls, and I spend time with my partner. But then if I was to put in a percentage, probably 60% of the people I speak to day in, day out are high performers that I've specifically asked to come on the podcast, like yourself, Matt. I've interviewed you a couple of times now, that add to that incoming mindset, that if it's like, if you were a pessimist and you were to spend your time around 5 optimists, you'd want to strangle them all at first, but eventually you become an optimist. You'd have no other choice, because your brain's wired to fit into the tribe. So with my tribe of people that I'm speaking to every day, they're all kind of imprinting on me, and hopefully I'm picking up the right bits to kind of instill into my brain.
So here's a question for people listening to this, and who are hopefully becoming increasingly aware of how important it is in terms of who they spend time with. Clearly, if they're not running a podcast, obviously they don't have the opportunity to interview high performers necessarily. So what tips do you typically give to people in general in terms of how do you find more people who will elevate your performance, your achievement levels?
In the business context, super simple. Find someone that you look up to and email them saying that you want to work for them for free the weekend, or you want to, whatever your skill is, you want to help them with that. If you're a graphic designer, you want to go and their website sucks and you want to go and work for them for free, and you want to spend essentially just a little bit of time with them. That's super easy from a business side of things. As an entrepreneur, as a sales professional, just any business role. Within your organization, if you're employed, there's going to be a ton of people. It's probably the most underutilized tool for sales professionals is to go to not their sales manager, not the national sales manager, but to go to the CSO, the CRO, whoever they're kind of labeled as, and just say, hey, can you to me about X? Or go to your CFO and say, hey, I want to spend some time around you. I want to learn more about the financial side of things, because I think that can impact our customers, with the business. Outside of the world of kind of business, you've got to hang out where interesting people hang out, right? So I've not done it for a while now, but I did a lot of clay pigeon shooting. So I was hanging around a lot of rich farmers who were totally different to me and the city life that I live, but had great insights on buying property, on buying land, all these insights that you'd find it very difficult to get otherwise. Then I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu multiple times a week with a bunch of dudes and women that I would make an assumption on seeing the way that they dress, the way that they hold themselves. Not everyone. There's a mass mix of entrepreneurs and even people who are on the dole and all kinds of stuff that train with us. And as soon as you walk through the door, your kind of status in society disappears. Mm-hmm. But that environment encourages people to be humbled. So, I've only been doing it for just over a year or so, and I suck at jiu-jitsu. And for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's a bunch of people rolling around on the floors in heavy dressing gowns trying to strangle each other. You get strangled 10 times in a row and you think you're tough, and you're getting battered by a girl who weighs the same weight as you or a little bit or a little bit less. That's crazy humbling, right? Same thing when I'm tall and skinny. I roll one who weighs, if I'm 12 stone, they might weigh 17, 18 stone, and the big burly fellas, but because I've been training longer than them, I smash them, and it's all in good fun. But it's humbling. So as soon as you walk through that door, you're spending time with people that you wouldn't as I said, I spend time with people that I wouldn't perhaps otherwise have spent time with. Mm-hmm. And again, that's humbling, and that's an eye opener of, there's one fella that I don't want to kind of slag off as I say this, and hopefully he never hears this, but he dresses in tracky bottoms. He strikes me as what we call in the UK a bit of a chav. He's a lovely guy, really intelligent. He's got a lot going for him, and he just dresses in a particular way that I don't kind of aspire to dress as or relate to. You're rolling around on the floor with him, and he's choking you unconscious, and then you get up and he picks you up off the floor and you have a laugh afterwards. Again, you're spending time with people that can give you insights that you, on a straight and narrow path with your head down, you wouldn't have otherwise seen.
And it's interesting because it raises a point to me when, as I listen to this, and I'll give you 2 or 3 different examples, just partly, well, not for you that you need them, but for people listening. I mean, you've interviewed some extremely well-known people with remarkable CVs, resumes, and so on. And I won't lie, that's still an area for me where I get some level of intimidation or discomfort. And I know, and then for people that are listening, like I've worked with lots of financial advisors, but the same is I found to be just as true for estate agents, realtors in the States, that, they all have a comfort level with around somebody's wealth. So, the easy example would be, I suppose, I'll just use the wealth management person, let's say, who has an average client. The average client, let's say, he earns about, $200,000 a year. And then all of a sudden they have an opportunity to talk to someone that's worth 10 million, and they get cold feet. So I'm going with this is, I love your examples, and the objection that not just pops up in my head, but I suspect other people might have is, how have you got past being intimidated by people, especially in the first couple of years when perhaps no one had heard of your podcast, and you're this, entertaining guy from Yorkshire who's contacting people in, somewhere in a far-flung country, and you want to pick their brains about their expertise. How did you not get intimidated by them?
Oh, I did. Just 100% intimidated. There's a few people I've had on where it's been a terrible show because I started the show by saying, hey, I'm so excited to chat with you. And then you can see their face go, oh, gee, an amateur has kind of walked onto the set here. So that was a lesson learned of not necessarily fake it till you make it, but just understand that, especially with this context of interviewing people, they're being interviewed day in by TV shows, which some TV that they do, I get way more downloads and views, and they get way more attention through my show than they do the local TV or radio station, for example. So they're just being interviewed day in, day out. They're trained professionals, most of them. They don't care either way. All they want is a good interview, a good piece of content. And so if you can give it to them, then there's no reason for you to be nervous, right? But for the first, it happens less and less now. But if I was to interview, I mentioned earlier, Richard Branson, if I was to interview Elon Musk, anyone of that kind of size, which are the people I'm kind of pitching at the moment to try and get on the show, and again, pitching way beyond where kind of what we're capable, and hoping that the story kind of catches people and gets them involved as opposed to just the audience size, I'd be nervous interviewing them. Of course I would. It never disappears. Again, if you are not nervous regularly, you're probably not pushing hard enough. Now, the money side of things is a bit more complex because there's good data on most people earn between plus or minus 20% of the money that their parents earned. So if you grew up, and this is not my kind of childhood, but if you grew up, went to private school, then went to Oxford or Cambridge, again, you're surrounded by affluent, wealthy people. And so your standards get to a certain point that's programmed into you. So when you go beyond your standards and you earn another 200 grand this year because you've really hustled and you've done well, you end up buying a ridiculous car and wasting it and getting back down to baseline. Same thing as if you're used to earning 100 grand a year and you get down to 50 grand, you go, holy heck, I've got to get my finger out here. And you double down, you do twice as much work as what you even thought was possible. And you get back up to that kind of baseline level. So there's kind of multiple elements to all of this, but a lot of it is just our standards. And that's what I try and do with the sales school. The first thing is you come in, you do a personality test. The first thing after that is how can we raise your standards? Because I feel most people go on this kind of up and down, and they're bouncing between it all. And most of the time they are edging towards the bottom end of their standards as opposed to kind of bouncing around the middle. So if we can raise our standards up, if we can make it that we want to earn X amount of money, or we want to spend time with X amount of people, or people of a certain wealth, and to not do that is essentially unhygienic. That's how it feels like we've not had a shower for 3 days when we are not earning, vast amounts of wealth or whatever it is that we're kind of aiming towards. That's when we are kicked into gear, and that's when we get into the states of flow and all this kind of stuff. And that's where we really kind of make a move. If we're comfortable, well, the word sums it up, right? We're just sat there chilling and waiting for the next thing to come and derail us.
Right. So just to pop back then to what we talked about a few minutes ago. So in terms of feeling nervous or intimidated, you're saying basically feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like either call it fear and then it's something that controls you and it's a negative, or you call it excitement.
Right.
And it's something it's the same thing. It's the same butterflies. It's the same hormones. It's the same neurochemicals going off. It's the same fight or flight response where your brain's going, you can look at it on the negative side of I'm getting ready to run away here because I'm scared. Or you look at it the other side of I'm getting excited and my brain's getting wired up and there's a bit of adrenaline so I can be quicker, so that I can be more attentive. With the interview, I can be asked better questions. I can be more in the moment. I can be more in the zone. So it's the same thing. It's just the language that we use to describe it. What kind of preparation do you do then for interviews like that? 'Cause I'm just curious. In other words, I was under the impression that you, I guess, trusted in yourself. And this is all coming out of my mouth. I'm not thinking it through necessarily, but just going with having a conversation versus researching someone and saying, okay, well, let's see. Like when you were first time you interviewed me, I mean, I assume I told you in advance, I've got this 4-step process. I'd like to talk about it. Do you kind of do a bit of back and forth that way? What I'm trying to say, I'll ask you one question. Do you do extra preparation for people that you're a bit more intimidated by? No, not necessarily. It looks like I do zero preparation for anything. So if someone sends me a book, I won't read the book. I'll flick through it and I'll get the gist of things. But as you said, Matt, I want it to be a conversation. So I don't want to know the 4 steps, or maybe I want to know the headlines of the 4 steps. I don't really want to know how they intertwine because I want it to be, as I'm chatting, that the audience is coming along with that journey for me. When you have 2 people who know everything about the conversation, they end up butting heads and they're going back and forth on things, and that's not as interesting to me as us chatting about referrals or whatever it is. and going through the steps, and then me going, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about this, because that's what the audience are asking themselves in their head. They're going, oh, I didn't know that, or that go down this thread, or I wish Will would ask this question.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be live with it. With that said, again, going back to managing the downside, I've got enough on paper, enough at the back of my mind, so that I don't look like an idiot. You don't want to just go into a conversation, whether this is a sales conversation, a podcast, whatever it is, an interview, a job interview. You don't want to go into it with nothing prepared because someone slips, someone spills a drink, something goes on in the background, it throws you off your game for just a split second. You're never going to be able to pull it back around. So I've always got a couple of questions in my back pocket. I tend to know more about the guest than what I let on that I know about the guest, their history, their story. And I tend to kind of play all that down and keep it conversational. I try and keep it as in we've met a couple of times and we're just having a pint at the bar and I'm genuinely interested in what you're saying. It's as simple as that.
That works really well. It's funny. It's so funny because, I mean, I have interviewed several people already and I do say, you know, I won't ask any of these questions in all likelihood, but I'm just curious. But you said 2 or 3 things that really like grabbed me by the throat in your email back to me. And one of them was you said, no one expects me to get where I'm going. And the context for the listener was it relates sort of to what some people call the big leap. In other words, my contention and life experiences is that most people don't make it, you know, that they typically get in life to where they're socially expected to get and seldom get much beyond that, as perhaps you indicated, the plus or minus 20%. And so we've talked about the imposter syndrome already, but then you sort of said, well, I think people would expect me to be where I am today, but then you said, but no one expects me to get where I'm going. So I was really intrigued by that.
So this comes down to both, I'm projecting myself onto that a little bit and also projecting people's thoughts and opinions on me that I have right now. And as I said earlier on in the show, I've got a chip on my shoulder, but in a positive way. I don't want to knock anyone else's buildings down. I just want my building to be bigger than theirs. I don't need to attack them for me to have success. But if you just said to me 5 years ago, hey, Will, you can have a podcast that is, you know, millions and millions of downloads every year. The YouTube show is going to be getting millions of views and everything's swimming along. The revenue's going up and not that I'm bothered about getting respected in the kind of space. I don't really care what anyone thinks about me. But when I go to conferences, people come over and shake my hand and that's all kind of nice to meet the audience and then meet people who come on the show and a lot of people that have been on the show listen to the show, especially sales trainers and people within that space. That's all well and good. Now, if you would have said that to me 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have gone, that is amazing. That's all I want. That is so far from where I was with 0 downloads and 2 interviews, which no one listened to the first kind of 100 episodes of the show. That is so different to where I am now that I'm like, okay, that'd be incredible. Now, I think most people, the leap from where I am now to where I want to go, in that I want to have, and we don't need to go too in detail to the mission and everything I'm on here, unless you want to, Matt, but I want to have a real dent in the sales industry. I'm less concerned about what people think about salespeople, and other people have missions on that. Of clearly, the sales industry has a stereotype. It has a kind of people associate it with the slimy used car sales professional, as opposed to my world, which is selling, you know, tens millions of dollars worth of deals to the NHS here in the UK, to selling to governments. The two worlds kind of are on opposite ends of the scale. So I'm less concerned about what other people think, but I'm more concerned about shoving my audience and anyone who cares to listen up into the higher end of sales, because this is all going to disappear. The lower end used car sales people are going to disappear over the next kind of few years. I'd argue that with anyone who kind of cares to argue with it, but I'm trying to push everyone up there. And I know with what we're doing, we're creating a ton of wealth for people. And eventually we'll be able to put a number on that wealth, and whether it's, you know, millions of revenue that's generated now, it might be billions, depending on the size of the audience and the scale of things. But when I reflect on, so I mean, it's about 4 years of the podcast now, and that's where I've got all these numbers from, because I went back and looked at from 0 to 4 years, 25+ million downloads and all this kind of stuff. If I look another 4 years into the future, because it's all compounding, it's going to be incredible. And it's not, I've got confidence in myself that I'm going to achieve these goals that I've got set out for myself. But I think if you asked anyone else right now, even my peers, the people around me, other than a few very wealthy individuals that I spend time with, who go, why aren't you doing 5 times that with your goals? Why are you aiming so low? Everyone else other than those people, they're going to be as shocked as what I'm going to be looking back, if that makes sense. That wasn't a very succinct answer, but kind of trying to pull multiple things together here. But yeah, that it's difficult to put a number on. It's difficult to define, but I'm super confident that I'm going to look back at this point in 4 years and go, oh, you're doing well then, like, kid, well done. Look what you're doing now.
Now that makes sense in terms of the trajectory that you're talking about, and yeah, the drive and the belief, and then also spending time with people that keep nudging you towards bigger goals and giving you some of those ideas, and I suppose putting those in your own kind of field of listening, so the ideas start to land with you. 2 or 3 more questions as we start to wrap up. You've mentioned in the past about the importance of self-development. So for people listening, what would you say are the 2 or 3 most useful things that you do that help you continue to grow and achieve?
The most important thing that I focus on right now, and the Sales School product, kind of 20-30% of it is based around this as we move forward, is personality testing. So you can go online, there's multiple free Myers-Briggs personality tests. If you are in sales or anything like that, there are sales personality tests that you can do. Probably have to pay for them, or recruitment testing, that side of things. That will give you more insights about yourself than you could possibly ever imagine. If you've never done Myers-Briggs before, you're going to read that page and you're going to go, how does this website know so much about me? It knows my inner, deepest, darkest thoughts. So once you've got it for yourself, clearly sales, business, life in general is 90% how you communicate with people. So once you understand your own personality type, then you can go, oh, my partner is slightly, if I'm extroverted, she's introverted. This means that we may make a great couple and there's great chemistry there. But it means that, and I know this with my partner, I go to bed an hour earlier than her every night because she needs an hour to wind down without me running around being hyper and pestering her. She needs that space from me for us to have a healthy relationship. And intuitively, I kind of knew this, in that she'd be kind of looking at a watch at kind of 9, 10 o'clock going, why are you still here? Like, leave me alone to watch TV on my own or read a book or whatever. And so intuitively I knew that. But as soon as we started doing these personality tests, I was like, oh, this makes total sense. There's definitions here. I know that I use my intuition way too much, and I'm not as logical as what I need to be to have long-term success. I'm super unable to go from the podcast. For context, I'm doing it even with just this, the answer to this question. I'm always flitting around between different things, and success in anything is the same thing every day, and forming habits that last years. The podcast is the only thing I've ever done for 4 years in the whole of my life. I've never played, I guess I played basketball when I was younger for more than 4 years, but other than that, I've never played a sport. I've barely played drums as an instrument for more than 4 years. Even that's been on and off and back and forth. University, I was there for 4 years, but I didn't really pay much attention. I really sucked at that. I was like the worst chemist in the whole of Bangor in the kind of the training that we did there. I don't know what else. I guess the only thing to layer on top of that with regards to self-development is I have been doing self-development for 4 years. So personality testing is really important. Reading is really important. I don't buy into the fact that you can listen to an audio book on the way to and from work and have the same benefits as sitting there with a paperback book, even a Kindle. I've got a Kindle. I use it for reading kind of fiction, but for business books, books I want to learn on, I want to have the book, I want to stick Post-it notes in it, and I want to study it. Most books I don't get all the way through because after the first 2 chapters, it's just nonsense, and they're just trying to use filler to make it a book and not a blog post. But reading paperback books, making notes, personality testing, if you're doing both of them and you've got some way of tracking your performance, again with the sales, I'm not trying to plug the product here, but this is kind of all I'm thinking about constantly, so it all fits in with it. We've got a planner that forces you to do your most important, you cannot fill in the planner and not do this AM rather than PM. Yeah, it forces you to have your most important task of the day defined. You have to get it done AM. Also, it forces you to do a bold action. It's quite open in that it could be doing something at home. It could be breaking up with one of your friends who dragged you down. It could be telling your boss that you want to raise, whatever it is. If you do a small bold action or a large bold action, and your most important task every day, and you track it, and you make sure, because most people think that they're doing these things every day, but they're only doing it twice a week. Again, with the sales school, we've got a ton of data now that shows on a Friday, salespeople don't do any work. They don't do nothing. It's crazy how little work on a Monday morning, and on a Friday from about 10 o'clock onwards, people don't do anything. That's a huge chunk of the week, right? Over 5 days, just doing that could be the difference between hitting your target and not hitting your target. So you need to know your personality, know the personality types of the people that you love and you want to spend time with, so you can communicate effectively with them. Read books, and then track things. Nothing complicated, Matt. I wish it was complicated, because I could charge a whole lot more for it all with the sales school and our products, but it is literally as simple as that.
Well, you explain it in a very simple way, but doing these things, I mean, as you say, hardly anyone does one or two of these things, let alone all of them. So once you add it all up, it starts to look very impressive. And all of this tracking, and the I think you mentioned a journal, that's all part of the sales school kind of program.
It's the software that comes with it. There's all training on kind of negotiations, all the classic stuff in sales. We've just done a workshop on how to get better sleep, because again, the foundations of all this, if you're not sleeping, if you're sleeping 5 hours a night, there's no point in learning how to negotiate, because you're going to be a mushy mess the other side of the table as you try and go back and forth with someone. So again, it's all the foundational things. It's all the things that your grandmother told you when you were a kid. It's all the simple things that aren't flashy, aren't exciting, but you do them progressively over a month, a year, a decade. That's when you see the huge results from them. And this is the problem, which I alluded to at the top of the show, of you think that you did something impressive. You started using Facebook ads, or you started not cold calling, you started lumpy mailing people or whatever it is to get attention in the marketplace. Well, you might get some responses, but it's because they've seen all the stuff you've done over the past 2 years that leads them to respond at that moment.
Right.
We need a way of tracking things so that we can see that everything that we're doing is working, or there's some progress. Otherwise, we lose our train of thought. We like to experiment. We go for grass is green on the other side. We get shiny object syndrome, and I'm susceptible to all of this. So everything that I'm doing is double for me. Some personality types find all this a lot easier than what my personality type does.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, people that generally in sales are good people and aren't so strong on all the details and some of the things you're talking about. So tracking it makes really good sense. So just starting to wrap up here, I've got 3 final questions. The first one is, who would you say you've become since that day in the pub when you cried because you were so frustrated with your medical device sales job?
I've become the person that I wanted to become. I've become, this sounds so cheesy, but I've become the hero of the story, right? I've become, and I'm constantly planning 2, 3, 5 years ahead of who's that person that I'm going to become, because you can't achieve the things that you want. Or let me put this another way. If I could be the person instantly that I want to become in 5 years' time, everything that I want to achieve would seamlessly come to me, right? Because I'd have the network, I'd have the things in place, I'd have all of this stuff intrinsically tied together. So you've got to always be aiming to be that next version of yourself, version 1, version 2, version 17, or whatever it gets up to. So when I sat there in the pub, I knew that I wanted to have a voice. I knew that I wanted to have some kind of impact. I knew that there was an industry that I was passionate about that needed changing. And so I could visualize myself now. And maybe I didn't have a beard or whatever it was. Visually, things have changed slightly on that front. But I'm now the person that at that point I was looking forward to wanting to be.
And I'd like to think everyone aspires to something similar. What do you think is a good first step for people?
I don't know if everyone aspires to be something similar. I think most people aspire to go, right, I want to me debt, I want to pay off my mortgage, and then I want to just have a peaceful life. That's not how things work. Humans are wired to build, to have projects. You can't have ups if there's no downs. You can't be. The only way to be comfortable is to be confident in the risk that surrounds you. I'm comfortable because I know my downsides and I know the potential upsides. I don't think most people. So the first step is to have a sit down, have a think of not where do you want to be in 5 years, but who do you want to be in 5 years? And not necessarily, I want to have this car, I want my kids to have done X, Y, Z, or I've moved to college, or whatever it is that coincides with it. You as a person, do you want to be confident? Do you want to be in shape? Do you want to have loads of energy? Do you want to be more relaxed? Because if you want to be more relaxed and money's stressing you out, then you need to hustle and earn some more money. You don't just become more relaxed. You need to find the cause and the effects, and then suss out who the person is that is in control of all of that, and then become that person.
Thank you so much. And then lastly, how can listeners find out more about you?
Google me, head over to salesman.org. You can find the podcast everywhere you find podcasts. And yeah, Sales School's over at salesschool.org as well. It's as simple as that.
And I definitely encourage everyone listening to this to do just that. It's tons of fantastic information, and also done in a very entertaining way. Will, just a few more things to wrap up on my end just for a second here, but thank you massively for coming on the podcast. It's been I've taken tons and tons of notes, so I know it was useful for me. I know it was useful for lots of other people as well. But just in wrapping up, I guess the reminder I'd like to send to everybody is, it's easy sometimes to listen to people that are very accomplished to somehow disconnect and say, well, I can never be that person. And, just remember, everyone has flaws, and you don't have to be perfect to achieve a lot in certain areas of your life anyway. And, to take some of the lessons that we've already heard today and start moving forward on those. And then in wrapping up, I definitely want to thank all of you for listening. Truly hope, I can't imagine you didn't get some great ideas from this. And in addition to obviously checking out the links on Will's Sales School and also on his podcast, which will be in my show notes. That's on my website, matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. Please do subscribe to the podcast and leave any reviews. And with that, I'll sign off with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken. Thank you so much.